All right. Soon. We like to start exactly at 8 because we like being on a schedule. Yep, but I even have your intro now. Now we are. All right. So we are starting to talk. Welcome to UACNJ, United Astronomy Clubs of New Jersey. So we do, from April through October, we do have live presentations every Saturday here on site. We are also streaming this online on our YouTube. So while I'm waiting for a couple of more people in our live audience to get situated and get down here, we'll just go over a couple brief things. If you do need to use the restroom, we have the porta potty to my right, your left. After the show, or when I'm not helping out with the show, I will be running the gift shop that's over to my left, your right. We are a nonprofit, so all the proceeds, all donations go to keeping our lights on and helping us keep offering the free public programs to you guys. So like I said, we are streaming all these presentations live to our YouTube. You can check us out. If you ever can't make it here, you can always see them online. You can also check out our past talks that we've had. If you go check out our website, UACNJ.org, it will also have a list of all of our current talks, what talks are coming up next, and what talks we've had in the past, as well as lists of such as who our member clubs are, because United Astronomy Clubs of New Jersey, as the name implies, is actually an umbrella organization where we hope to support all our local astronomy clubs in the New Jersey, and some including into Pennsylvania and New York State. So it looks like we are getting those last couple stragglers moving in. We also have our Facebook, where just like on our website, we will post if there's any new interesting events or special events. Hopefully with COVID starting to clear, we start having a couple more special events going on now. So with those couple of announcements out of the way, tonight's presentation is George E. Hale, Contributions to Astronomy in the 20th Century. And this talk is being given by our own Mark Sproul, who has a Bachelor of Science degree in Computer Engineering from Rutgers School of Engineering and a Master's degree in Mechanical Engineering from Stevens Institute of Technology. He works for the U.S. Army on embedded computer systems, specializing in low-level image processing. His interest in astronomy started in the early 1990s, writing software to read and display image data from the NASA Voyager, Viking, and Magellan space probe missions. In 2014, he moved from New Jersey to PA, where the much darker skies inspired him to get back into astronomy and to build his own observatory. He built the entire dome he has from scratch by himself. It has taken 2.5 years working nonstop to build this observatory. He has written all of his own software to run said observatory. And I forget how many talks ago it was, he actually gave a talk on building that observatory. So after this presentation tonight, you might want to go check out our YouTube to see that talk as well, because that was actually fun. So with that, here's Mark.
Push the on button. Oh, there we go. Okay, good evening. Set up your chairs, sit down, go ahead. We're going to be talking about George Ellery Hale, kind of my hero. In my opinion, he is the most significant person in astronomy in the 20th century. And what he did, as it says, 4 times he went to really rich people and said, how would you like to have your name on the world's largest telescope? So for almost 100 years, 97 years, from 1897 to 1992, the world's largest telescope had been built by George Ellery Hale. This is a Wikipedia's quote. American astronomer. He specialized his own astronomy, was concentrated around solar astronomy, which we're going to talk about some more later, sunspots. And his, like I said, his key contribution was building the 40-inch telescope at Yerkes, the 60-inch at Mount Wilson, the 100-inch at Mount Wilson, and the 200-inch at Palomar. And that's what we're going to be talking about this evening, is the telescopes that he contributed to make modern astronomy possible. And this is Mount Wilson's quote. His greatest legacy is perhaps his work on building the observatories and getting the funding to build them. These aren't cheap. Today's big observatories in Chile are $1 billion. And Palomar was $6 million in 1928. So very expensive to build these. Personally, he was very sick. As a child, his mother, kind of doted after him quite a lot. He had asthma and other issues. Married to a lady named, and I can't pronounce, Evelina Conklin. He had 2 children, and he suffered from neurological and psychological problems. Today we'd call it depression and nervous breakdowns. But it was largely because he was so self-driven. He started at MIT at age 17, spent a lot of time at Harvard Observatory. He got his first telescope. His father bought him at age 14, very interested in science, and he was a professor at University of Chicago, which we'll get to in a little bit. The 4 great telescopes. The first one, he grew up in Chicago. He was the son of a elevator manufacturer. If anybody's heard of the Great Chicago Fire, well, Chicago burned down. And a lot of people made a lot of money rebuilding it. And it was the very beginning of the steel age, before everything was brick or wood, and it's kind of maxed out at 4 or 5 stories. Well, with the Chicago Fire, steel buildings had just come into vogue, and with a steel building that's 10, 12, 15 stories high, you have to have an elevator. So his father became very wealthy selling elevators. And so he was a well-to-do family and was able to do all of this. Born in 1868, he wasn't even 30 years old when the Yerkes was finished. Mount Wilson was started in 1904, 1908 the 60-inch at Mount Wilson. These are the diameters of the telescope, not the length, the diameter. So a 40-inch refractor has got a lens on it this big around. 60-inch is bigger, and the 200-inch is 17 feet. So from me to Paul over there. So these are big telescopes. This didn't come out right. Your screen missed. No, there's some stuff off the bottom missing. Why is it missing off? Anyway, he died in 1938, which was the last line on the bottom. All right, what did just happen?
It just wasn't on your slide.
There we go. Okay, so the first person he went to was Charles Tyson Yerkes. He was a banker and stockbroker in Chicago. He was probably close, associated with the mob, very much underworld, did a lot of shady deals, and he contributed $400,000. If it weren't for the observatory, he would be a footnote in some history book someplace, and nobody would ever know anything about him. But because he did this, he's gone down in infamy. So he accomplished what he wanted to do. He made a name for himself by contributing this money to build the telescope. Like I said, otherwise, you wouldn't have heard of him. He'd read some history book someplace. And this is where the observatory is. It's University of Chicago, obviously it's in Chicago, and they built it up there's the Chicago-Minnesota border, and just north of that at Williams Bay in Wisconsin. And this is the observatory. It is an absolutely beautiful observatory. Of the 4 telescopes that we've been to, I have not been. We're going to be talking about tonight. I have not been to Yerkes. I've been to the other ones. Now, by today's standard, there's a major problem with this observatory. It's built out of stone. It's gorgeous. Stone collects heat during the day and radiates it at night. Giving off heat at night when you're trying to look at the stars gives you turbulence in the air, like driving down the road in the summertime, you see the waves coming off the pavement. So, but they didn't know that back then. They didn't know, because this was built in 1897. So the main telescope obviously is the big dome, and the other 2 smaller domes for smaller telescopes. And this is the telescope. It's a 40-inch refractor. Now, a refractor is where the light goes through the lens. A reflector is where the light bounces off of a mirror. This is the world's largest refractor. They did build one larger than this, but it was a failure. So this is the largest one, still to this day, is the largest refractor in the world. And the floor in here, you can't see it very well, but the floor, because this was back in the days where everything was visual. Somebody looked through the telescope with their eye. So this telescope would move, from all the, and you couldn't get up on a ladder, so the floor moved up and from down here all the way up to there, so that the astronomers could be at the eye level to see through the telescope. And this shows you how big that telescope is. Now, why is this the biggest refractor? That's glass. You have to support it from the edges. Anything bigger than that, the glass sags too much, and you can't support it well enough to make a bigger refractor. So that's why it's still to this day the biggest refractor ever built. This shows you how beautiful the building is. It's all, I think it was cast concrete, but all, gargoyles and inlays and everything, just an absolutely gorgeous building. This is the main dome. Just all the detail throughout everywhere of the dome. Just really, and again, it's all made out of brick, so it would absorb the heat. Inside was just as beautiful. Really beautiful architecture, workmanship, just really, really well done. At Yerkes, the birthplace of what we call modern astrophysics. Prior to Hale being involved, astronomy worldwide was all about position of the stars, measuring the position of the stars. The old school astronomers felt that that's all you could do. There's no way we could reach out and find what the star is made of. They never in a million years expect we'd be able to do that. They didn't know how. So everybody concentrated on where are the stars in the sky. How astronomy got started in the first place hundreds and hundreds of years ago was for doing navigation, mainly for sea navigation, so that you could figure out where you were. So these old school astronomers, that's all they cared about. Hale, on the other hand, wanted to study the stars themselves. He personally spent almost all of his own work working on studying the sun. He discovered magnetism on the sun in sunspots. He did a lot of work in his own right in astronomy, studying the sun. So him pushing this astrophysics concept started at Yerkes in 1897 when Yerkes came online. Still the largest refractor in the world. It's no longer used for science, just not big enough. There was a 48-inch refractor made in Paris in 1900. It was a financial failure. They couldn't get backing for it, and it was torn down in a few years and never used for science. Before he even was finished with Yerkes, he wanted something bigger. He wanted something better. And he realized that near a water body with all the low elevation, all those clouds and everything was not good, and that the stone was not good for building an observatory. So he built Mount Wilson, founded in 1904 with money from Carnegie Institute. Obviously, we'll get to Andrew Carnegie in a minute. And the first instrument was the Snow Solar Observatory, which had been built at Yerkes. Money for that donated by a well-to-do lady named Snow. and was moved to Mount Wilson at 5,700 feet elevation, above the clouds. I was out there 2 years ago, and for 6 out of 7 days that we were there, the clouds were there and covered Los Angeles, and we were above the clouds. It was great. Andrew Carnegie, born 1835, died at 1919. One of the richest men in the world, in the United States, led the expansion of the steel industry. He started the Carnegie Science Foundation, or Carnegie Institute in Washington, D.C., and Hale managed to go to them and sell them on the idea of donating the money to build Mount Wilson. Mount Wilson is in California. Los Angeles, Pasadena. It's about an hour, almost 2 hour drive. As a crow flies, it's not very far, maybe 30 miles. But it's up the mountain, around the corners, there must be 100 different turns just get up there to get up the mountain, because you're going from sea level in Los Angeles to 5,700 feet, which is over a mile high. So it's a lot of back turns, back roads, small roads. But that's where it's located. And you probably can't, you can read that okay. A lot of these pictures, now nothing at Yerkes, I didn't take any of those pictures. A lot of the rest of these pictures I took myself. This is the sign at Mount Wilson, still run by the Carnegie Institute. A very nice place, absolutely beautiful up there. This is looking down into the mountain from the Snow telescope. Helen Snow donated the money, moved to Mount Wilson in 1904. It was horizontal. It had a mirror, would take the sunlight, and so the mirror would move as the sun moved, and move and transfer the light to horizontal into this big long thing. So under this part at the end, they would roll that off, and there was the mirror that would then project the light into the tunnel for the observing. This other tower here we're going to get to in a minute, were the subsequent solar observatories that they built, because they realized the horizontal had too much heat problems, so they built 2 more that were vertical. And this is a picture I took of the 2. One of them is 60 feet tall. Obviously the shorter one is 60 feet tall, the taller one is 150 feet tall. And they again have a mirror that tracks the sun and points the sunlight straight down through the lens and then down to the ground level, where they do the cameras and observation. And this is the dome. I don't know which tower this is top of, but this is a good picture of the dome that sits up there. There's actually a person in there. That's a person. So there's a mirror there. So the sunlight comes in from here, hits this mirror, gets reflected up to there, and then goes down. And there's a lens somewhere under here that then is the lens of the telescope, and then the focus is down at the ground level. Bugs in my hair. It's just another picture I took of the solar observatory. A little bit close up. And this is, so sunlight comes in here and comes down. This is ground level. It actually goes down to the bottom, hits another mirror, and comes back up and hits a mirror here. And this is the table on which the observing is done. So it projects the sun in a disk about, I think it's about 17 inches in diameter, that they can then actually take a pencil and draw on a piece of paper where the sunspots are. And that's done every single day that's clear, which Mount Wilson has, over 290 clear days a year. And I did not use this telescope, but I actually got to go into this room and take a look at this. Now, another telescope, which is not one of the big ones, you'll see why I've got this in here in a minute. This is a 6-inch Warner and Swayze telescope that was installed in 1909. And thanks to Tom Spirock, another member here, 2 years ago, I got to go out to Mount Wilson and spend a week out there using that telescope. This is me in front of the dome that houses that telescope. Again, this was built in 1909. And there's me with the telescope, and there's a picture that we took using that telescope. Like I said, it's a 6-inch refractor. And it's really cool that we were able to use, and let's see. You can't see it any good, but if you're really sharp, what's wrong with this picture? Down here at the very bottom is a modern CMOS camera. Everything else was built in 1909, except of course for the fire extinguisher. So we're taking a modern CMOS camera, putting it on a telescope from 1909, and getting some really good pictures. And there's a moon picture we took the same week using that telescope. And we had access to that telescope every single night. We got to use the 100-inch one night, and we were able to use the 60-inch a couple nights. Because my friend Tom has connections out there. He used to work out there at Big Bear Solar Observatory, so he has connections, was able to get us in there. Another thing that Hale did of significance is Caltech. I imagine most of you have heard of Caltech. Caltech is a really good technical school out in California, and it was founded as Throop College in 1891, and it was a Votech preparatory school. And Hale joined the board of trustees, and he had a vision of an MIT of the West. He wanted a good technical school out west. And in 1920, Throop College became the California Institute of Technology, also known as Caltech, which, if anybody knows about that school, is a very well, it's up there with MITs and Harvard and such like that. So now on to the 60-inch. So the first telescope he built was a 60 at Mount Wilson. So this is telescope number 2. So when this got started, the 40-inch was the biggest in the world. And he went to Carnegie and asked for the money and got the money to build the telescope. The mirror had been purchased by his father in 1894 as a gift, and it had been sitting around not being used. It wasn't even ground. It was just a piece of glass. And it had become available because somebody someplace had ordered the disc, and then they went bankrupt. And so this company in Europe that had the disc, it was available. His father bought it, and it just sat around from 1894 to 1904 approximately. So 10 years not being done with anything. And Carnegie paid to get it to ground and get it made into a telescope. This is the dome on the 60-inch telescope. Very large dome. We're going to get into some specs later. And this is a 60-inch telescope. Now, in this picture, you really can't see size. The eyepiece on here is that big around, 4 or 5 inches in diameter. This is a picture I took of it. Again, here's where the eyepiece is. And this picture puts it in perspective. There's a person, I've actually gone up on that ladder and looked, the picture was taken with lights on just so they have a picture, but I've actually been able to look through that telescope in that position. So there's a person to give you an idea for the size of it. A very large telescope. And it was the world's largest telescope from 1909 till 1908 till 1919 when the 100-inch came online, which we'll be getting to next. And this is the gears in the bottom that run that, and those gears are 12 feet in diameter, and they're the same style of gears that I use on my 16-inch telescope, except mine are a little bit smaller. Mine are about that big, and these are about this big. And it's you can't see it in the picture, but there's a worm gear down here, and this is a tensioner to turn this, to keep it to rotate with the Earth, so it keeps pointing to the stars. I took this picture because I really liked the gears, because I've built the gearing system for my telescope, and I thought it was pretty cool. So along comes the 100-inch, and John D. Hooker. And John D. Hooker said, build me the 100-inch telescope and send me the bill, which he later resented because it just kept costing more and more money that he wasn't expecting. Hale, among other things, was very well cultured. He was in the arts, theater and things like that. His mother had made sure that he was well-rounded, well-educated. And Hooker's wife was also fairly well, educated and into the arts and culture and such. And they became very good friends. It was not an affair or anything. It was just, they were friendship. They would talk a lot. When Hooker would come to visit when Hale would go visit Hooker, he would end up talking to the wife, and Hooker eventually got very jealous of him and stopped returning his calls and wouldn't let him come over anymore because his wife talked to Hale more than he talked to Hooker. So the 100-inch, the mirror blank weighed 4.5 tons. It was the world's largest telescope from 1917 when it came online until 1949 when the 200-inch comes online, which we'll be getting to in a little bit. Hooker supplied $45,000 to purchase the mirror and the grinding, and Carnegie provided the money to build the dome and everything else. Another picture of the telescope. This is the 100-inch telescope. We're going to get to it. The mounting of this telescope is quite a bit different than other telescopes, which plays an important part. And this gives you an idea of the size. Now, at Mount Wilson, these telescopes are no longer used for science, so they do things. This is actually a picture of a concert that is going on in the dome. Now, why would you have a concert inside an observatory dome? Well, guess what? During the day, the observatory domes don't get used. It's daylight out. You can't use the telescope. But the acoustics in a dome are really, really cool. So they do classical concerts. The musicians are right here in a circle, and people pay like $50 a head to come listen to the concert. When I was out there, I got to listen to one. I was in there. I didn't have to pay the $50, but I was in there when they were doing it, and it really did sound pretty cool because of the acoustics. And they're just doing it to raise money because they really they don't have any grant money anymore. They've got it's like us. They're nonprofit. They got to raise money. So the significance about this mount, it's what's called a English yoke mount. And it's supported, the previous telescope was supported only at one end. This one is supported at two ends, here and here. And then it pivots, so that whole mechanism pivots. What am I doing here? The whole mechanism pivots this way on this bearing, and then this whole thing pivots this way. But you can't, and this axis here, it's called an equatorial mount, is even with the Earth's axis, pointing at the North Pole, or North Star. So if you draw a line from here through there, up to the sky, it should intersect with the North Star. And that's the way we do telescope pointing. So this telescope cannot bend over far enough to look at the North Star. It was a compromise they were willing to do, but you'll see when we get to Palomar telescope, it was a compromise that they didn't want to do in that telescope. But it makes a major difference in how the mount is designed, how the mount is built, and such. This is the control panel. Now, there's obviously a computer sitting next to it, but this is the original control panel to run everything from 1917. And also, this telescope is very strange to, you're in there and they start to move the dome and you can freak out. You don't know what's moving. You think the telescope is moving. Turns out it's not. You're moving. See this line right here? Everything outside the line moves. Everything inside the line doesn't move. So you're here, and the telescope starts moving, and you're moving, and you don't realize it because it's so slow, so smooth. All of a sudden, the scope is moving, and you've got to really think in your head what's moving and what's not. And you can confuse yourself really easy, and it's cool and eerie at the same time. Just another picture of the telescope. You can see better what I'm talking about. There's no way that this can tilt over all the way like that. It can come about to there, and that's it. So they just have a limitation that they can't get to things real close to the North Star. But again, it was a price they were willing to pay. Everything in engineering is compromise. And this is the dome for the 100-inch. And this is a good diagram showing the floor. This is the part that moves from here to here from here to here does not move, but from here to there and from there to there does move. And this is a staircase. You go up those staircases to get to the platform, and you can work, and you view from down here, and you operate from up here at this level. Like I said, I got to spend half of a night observing through that telescope. And this is a picture of them transporting the 100-inch mirror up the mountain. The road, you go out there today, the roads are nice, they're paved, it looks real easy to get a truck up there. These were dirt roads. For the 60 inches, its telescope, they used mule teams to get the stuff up the mountain. And it would take all day. The trip right now in your family car from down Pasadena up there is an hour and a half drive, but it would take all day long. They weren't going very fast. The roads were not improved. There was at least one mule that fell down to its death off the side. I don't think any people were hurt, but there was at least one mule that did not make it through. And this is a list of what was done on the 100-inch telescope. Now everybody's heard of Hubble, right? Why I think Hale is so significant is without Hale, Hubble would have been nothing. Hubble did his discoveries using the 100-inch telescope. Hubble, Edwin Hubble, which the Hubble Space Telescope is named after, proved that our galaxy was not everything. Anyway, this is a list of what we've done. Hubble did his stuff. We're going to get to Milton Humason in a little bit. Fritz Zwicky is a not very well-known name unless you start studying astronomy history. He did a bunch of stuff there, and just some other people that did some stuff. I found this list. I did not do the list for the 200-inch because it was too long and it would take 2 hours just to go through that list. So what did Hubble do with the 100-inch telescope? This is Hubble's most famous image. This is the Andromeda Galaxy, but at that time, there were two schools of thought. Harold Shapley, who was the director of the Harvard Observatory, believed that we had the Milky Way galaxy, and there were these fuzzies out at the edge, and we don't know what they are, and that's all there was. That was the entire universe. There was another group of people that believed we have the Milky Way galaxy, and there's other galaxies out there. But nobody had any proof one way or the other. And there's a special kind of star called a Cepheid variable that allows you to determine the distance to something about how quickly it blinks. It pulses on and off. And so by using the Cepheid variables, you can determine the distance to something. And that's how they measured things in our galaxy. Well, Hubble was the first one to measure this, see this in here? First he thought it was a nova. And then up here, he crossed it out and he put variable VAR, and the date on it is 6 October 1923. And it was a variable star. And it proved that it was over a million light years away. Our galaxy at the time was believed to be 100,000 light years across. We now know it's about 200,000, but still, a million light years is 10 times that. So there's no way this thing, the Andromeda Galaxy, is at the edge of our galaxy. It's way out there. And he did this with many other galaxies as well, measuring this, because the 100-inch telescope had enough resolving power to do it. Without the 100-inch telescope, he could have never done this. Today we could have. So this is the same picture. Back then, so this is a negative. But when they do it, this is done on a photographic plate, typically 8 by 10 inches, glass plate. They put the emulsion on it, photographic process, and they left it in the negative form. Take the same image and invert it, and you now have a much easier to see image. So this image was taken in 1923 on a glass plate by Edwin Hubble. And this image was taken by me with a 3-inch telescope about that long, that big in diameter, with a modern CMOS camera. and it's the same thing. And you probably can't see it very good, but I was actually able to find these stars. This group of stars is that group of stars right there, and this line of stars is that line of stars right there. I was able to find the matching stars between my picture and Hubble's picture. So today, you could have done what Hubble did with, that's $600 worth of equipment. But it's because our camera technology is so much better. Not the optics is any better. Optics doesn't change. The camera technology is so much better. But this picture in the black and white form, that is, he did a lot more, but that is the epitome picture of what did Hubble discover, why is he famous. He discovered that, and that proved, and it shut Shapley at Harvard up. He no longer argued about it. It proved that it was outside, there was more to it, and it also proved the universe was expanding. So he was able to prove that as well. Okay, I mentioned earlier Milton Humason. And this is a book. In fact, I found this book putting this presentation together, and I ordered it off of Amazon, and it just came today. So I have not read this book yet. But he was what was called a mule skinner. Well, a mule skinner doesn't skin mules. Mule skinner drives the mule teams. He didn't graduate high school, but he worked with the mule teams, taking the equipment up. And after the observatory was built, he got a job as a janitor. And Hale, again, as I said, worked for many years. It's a little bit off the bottom, cut off the bottom there. Hale recognized how good of a worker he was. He was very, very meticulous. And he ended up helping Hubble with his observations for many, many years. And some of the work that Hubble is credited with, Humason actually did. But Humason didn't have a PhD, and he was an assistant. Later on in life, he was awarded an honorary PhD, even though he didn't even have a high school diploma, because he had contributed so much. So I just got this book in the mail today, so I'm going to read it. And this is why Mount Wilson is no longer used for scientific work. I took this as I was leaving Mount Wilson. This is the Los Angeles Basin. And what is that? Light pollution. As I said, when I was there for a week, 6 out of 7 days, you could not see that. You saw a blanket of clouds. On the last day we were there, the blanket of clouds was gone, and I could take this picture. So that really worked to our advantage, because we didn't have that glow bothering us taking our pictures that I showed you earlier. But that's why it's not used anymore for scientific work. And this is all messed up. Ah, crap, why is this so messed up?
Apparently. I'm going to collect them before they run away. Oh, gosh.
Another one. There's a pink one.
You okay there?
Yeah, why is that messed up? Anyway, that is supposed to say, Palomar 200-inch, bigger is better, is what that slide's supposed to say. John Davison Rockefeller, born in the U.S., in New York. He grew up poor. He became the richest man and person in America, and he donated $6 million. He got his money in oil and in railroads. He got rich in oil and realized that the railroads controlled the delivery of oil, so he bought most of the railroads so he could control his own delivery and keep his competitors at bay. Very ruthless, very honest but ruthless businessman, and became the richest man in America. And he donated $6 million to build the 200-inch. And again, the the 100-inch had only been completed in 1919, and by 1928, a mere 10 years later, Hale's building the 200-inch. And this is at Palomar, also in California. This is San Diego down here. Los Angeles is up here a ways, but this is where it is. And it's much farther away from light. It still has some light pollution problems, but not as near as bad as Mount Wilson. And Palomar is still, it's really called the Hale 200-inch telescope, but everybody calls it just Palomar. It's Palomar Mountain. There's a lot more telescopes on Palomar, but the 200-inch is the one that matters. And the 200-inch is the one that I fell in love with when I visited in 1995. We were in California for some other stuff, and we drove down to the San Diego Zoo, and I saw this sign for Palomar Observatory. I said, let's go take a look. And it was December 31st. And they were going to be open the next day on January 1st because it's a National Historic Site. And we went back the next day, spent half the day there. You just you can't see a whole lot. But since then, I've seen a whole lot more because of connections. But anyway, so that's where it is, north of San Diego. Again, way up in the mountains, 5,000 feet. 200 inches in diameter, almost 17 feet, 5.1 meters. For you telescope people, it's f3.3, which is a very fast telescope. The moving weight, the part that moves, is 450 tons. That's 900,000 pounds. The total weight of the telescope, not counting the dome, is 1.2 million pounds. And it was the world's largest from 1949 until 1993. So that's pretty recent. And this is the telescope. So what you've got to understand is that right there, there's some better pictures of it earlier. From there to there is as tall as I am. Okay? It's big. This right here is a walkway. I've got a better picture. You can climb up inside that tube. And this mount, see there's a horseshoe here? I got a better picture later. This allows this to tilt over and look at the North Star. Again, this axis here, running from down there to the center of that, is at the North Star for proper rotation of tracking stars. So the telescope moves this way, and then the whole thing rotates this way so we can get to any spot in the sky. The framework was built in Philadelphia, not that far from here, at a shipyard. Who knows how to build big steel stuff other than a shipbuilder? You can't go to your local contractor and say, build me something that weighs 100 tons. And so the ship works in Philadelphia, built the framework, and it was shipped through the Panama Canal to San Diego and then trucked up the mountain. In building the Palomar Observatory was kind of like Apollo or the space shuttles. There was so much that they didn't know how. We're going to do it, but we don't know how we're going to do it yet. How are we going to make this happen? They didn't know. Okay, we got $6 million to do it in 1928 dollars, so that's a lot more than it is now. For any kind of astronomy or lens, you need it to not have very much expansion. So as it gets hot and cools down, that it doesn't change size very much. Very important. The bigger the mirror is, the more important that is. And fused quartz is the best at that. It has almost zero expansion. And General Electric in Massachusetts spent 1/10 of the money, $600,000, trying to develop fused quartz. And they finally managed to do a 60-inch disc. And said, well, it's probably going to cost, because the contract was, not a fixed cost. It's going to, we're going to charge you by the hour what it takes us to do. And it was going to cost another $1 million if they could get it to work at all, because they had lots of problems building this fused quartz. At the same time, Corning so Hale gave up on the fused quartz and switched to Corning. We'll get to there in a minute. Another big contribution was a Serrier truss. A Serrier truss is a mechanism to allow you to build something that's very heavy, and when it sags, both ends stay parallel. very important in a telescope that this mirror and this mirror, if there's any they have to be perfectly parallel, because there's a mirror on both ends. The light comes in this way, goes to this mirror, comes to this mirror, and then goes back down through a hole in the center. And this young engineer who went to Caltech came up with this idea, and his name was Marc Serrier. And to this day, Serrier trusses are still used and still taught in mechanical engineering. And this is what a Serrier truss looks like. So it's got, tubes on it, and the weight here and the weight there has to be calculated. So you've got a real heavy mirror there that's short in, and you've got this longer, so it's kind of a teeter-totter thing, so you've got to balance it all out right when you design it. And he came up with this idea, and it worked. And this is that big horseshoe with some people on. This is the best picture I could find. Not that great of a picture, but gives you an idea. And another technology that they got figured out to do is oil bearings. So this outside surface rides on a mating surface. If you put ball bearings or roller bearings on it, remember I said it weighs 450 tons. They're going to deform. You're going to get, as you rotate it, you're going to get vibrations in it because of deformities in the metal. That's not acceptable. Any vibration in the telescope will ruin it as you're trying to track the stars. And again, a young engineer says, well, let's just use oil. And the old engineer said, oh, it's going to take 500 horsepower to drive the oil pumps to make it work. He said, no, it's not. And they ended up installing, and he proved them wrong. He proved himself right. And they ended up installing, I think the motors to run the pumps are only 25 horsepower. And I think they could have gotten away with as little as 5 horsepower to make it work. And again, they figured things out as they went. Very major engineering. So, as I said, they start off with the fused quartz, and then Corning glass works. Everybody's heard of Corning glass? You cook with it. And if you're ever up in Corning, New York, up north of Binghamton, it's only about 4.5 hours from here. The Corning Glass Museum is a really, really nice museum. Lots of history of glass making, and the original mirror that they made, which we'll get to in a minute, is up there. You can go see it and touch it. So they poured the mirror, and they're actually pouring it by hand into a big mold. And then they had to control the temperature. I think it was 1 degree Fahrenheit a day, because you're heating up to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and then you got to cool it down 1 degree per day over a year's time to get it down to the point so that it doesn't crack when you're cooling it. Very important. And then so it cooled down for a year. Everything was fine. They packed it up, and they cased it in steel, because there were fanatics, if anybody's watched the movie Contact, that thought telescope this big is going to be able to see God. You can't do that. And so they were afraid that people were going to shoot at it and stuff like that. And it was quite the big deal. The train was a engine, steam engine, a boxcar for supplies, this car, and a caboose, and that was it. It was only allowed to go during the day, at only 25 miles an hour all the way across country, very specific route, and basically guards the whole way. And every town it passed through, everybody came out to watch it go by. It was a big national event. And one account says they actually had to call the police out to get the people off the railroad tracks. So there were 10,000 people there, and cars coming for as far as they could see to come see it drive by. So it was quite the big deal. And then it gets to California, and then they have to polish it. So all it was is a piece of glass. We're going to get some better pictures. So this is the polishing machine. And when you're polishing a mirror, you take, I'm actually currently working on polishing my own mirror, a small 6-inch one. You take a piece of glass, you take another piece of glass, and you put some, basically it's much better quality than this, but if you went to Home Depot, bought some sandpaper and scraped the sandpaper off it, put it on there, that's the grit that you rub it back and forth on. Yeah, no, don't do that, but that's essentially what you're doing. You're using a grit, and you grind the two pieces of glass together, and one will become convex, the top one, the bottom one will be concave to do your service. Obviously, for a mirror this big, they have a machine to do that. And it took them 13 years total, but 2 years it got put up during World War II. It got put over the side of the shop and didn't get touched. But 11 years of grinding to remove 5 tons of glass. The mirror blank started off at 20 tons. They removed 5 tons of glass in making that curve to get the right magnification. And this is the testing setup. So you can see all these little holes in here. What they were was pockets up from underneath to reduce the weight. In the first casting, some of those cores popped loose because the glass was so hot and the bolts melted. They popped loose and floated to the top, and there was no fixing it. So they had to redo it all over again and do a second one and get better fastening the pieces that were, basically the filler that made those holes to the bottom of the mold. So the glass was poured in so that the mirror would be lighter weight. And this is a good picture of the mirror. Like I said, the first casting failed. They used Pyrex glass, which I mentioned before, a very low thermal expansion. Not as good as fused quartz, but still very low. In fact, pretty much all telescopes today are made out of Pyrex. Original weight 20 tons, 15 tons final. I said that already. And this is the dome. All right. This picture I took. Wrong direction. My friend Tom took this picture. The moving weight of the dome is 1,000 tons. 1,000 tons for the dome. The doors. Can we see the doors any good? Yeah, the doors. 125 tons each, and these doors move out sideways. Dome is 135 feet tall, 137 feet in diameter. Some people make a big deal about it's the same size as one of the big things in Greece, the Pyathlon. I don't know what's the big deal about it, but some people make a big. This gives you a better idea of the size. This is the dedication ceremony in 1949. And this is where the mirror is. This is those tubes, and that's all people. Pretty big, huh? And this is Hubble. Now back then, the astronomer was responsible for the guiding of the telescope. So you pick out a star, you get the telescope on it, and you have another eyepiece with a crosshair in it, and you sit there with a little paddle, kind of like your game paddle, but not hooked up to a computer, hooked up to electrical. And if you see a guide star on your crosshair start to drift, you have to push a button because the tracking is not perfect. So the astronomer would sit inside of this. Hubble would sit there for 9 hours straight, guiding. There's no taking a break, no bathroom break, and guiding. And the astronomer did that. And it was the astronomer's responsibility. I mentioned earlier about Humason. Humason was very good at that and helped Hubble do a lot of this stuff. But he sat up inside there, and it was cold. They would wear World War II surplus airplane suits, the heated suits that the airplane pilots wore in World War II, because it'd be very cold up there. Today, we do this all with the computers. And the astronomers might even be in another country. Do it all remote. Okay, this picture, there is a person. Now, this is where the mirror is. All this part right here is all newly added, was not originally there. So originally it stopped right there, and whatever your camera would go on the bottom up into there, you'll see a better picture. But there's the size of a person. And there's the gangplank so that you can get up and walk inside of that tube. And this is a good picture of that tube. You can see the stairs in there, so you can walk in there. Yeah, you got to kind of duck down to get in the hole. I have not been able to go up in there. Next time I go out there, my goal is to be able to walk up inside of there. And again, this is a picture of that bottom part. And these, if anybody knows anything about computer racks and communications equipment, it's a standard 19-inch rack. Racks about this wide, typically about this tall, that you put electronic equipment in. And that's what each one of these racks are. And they told me that they can pull all those racks off and replace everything in a day. So if you're going from observer 1 doing one experiment, and he's working on this week, and starting tomorrow as a new observer, new astronomer, doing something totally different, they come in with a forklift, pull these racks all off, pull the equipment, whatever sensors or cameras they have on there, down, and put it all back up and get it all back up within 24 hours. So the next night they're up and operational, a different thing. And this is a stairwell, just a removable stairwell to get up into there. Again, that's a standard door height right there. And I really like that picture because that's me standing up inside that cage. And this hole right there, now I'm kind of slouching there because if I stood up straight, I hit my head. But I was able to stick my hand up through that hole and touch the bottom of the mirror. And these yellow pipes, they're antifreeze, just like the antifreeze in your car. To cool the equipment down, to remove the heat, because we don't want heat in there. So the cooling radiators are down below, several hundred feet away to get the heat out. And the day I was up there, this instrument was a high-resolution spectrograph. Final chapter. Hale died 11 years before the 200-inch was complete. A few days before he died, he was in his workshop and he made the comment, "It's a beautiful day, the sun is shining, they're working on Palomar." He knew at that time all the design problems were solved, just the work had to be completed, things were going well, and he died 10 years before it was completed. And when it was completed, they named the telescope after him. Current status, Yerkes was almost torn down 2 years ago because the University of Chicago didn't want anything to do with it anymore. There was too much of a cost burden. Should be back open to the public next year. Mount Wilson is open to the public. They have viewing nights, and anybody can go rent it. If you want to rent the 100-inch for a whole night, it's $5,000. Half a night is $2,500. 60-inch is about half that. But if you want to go out and use it, I think they allow you to have a party for up to 25 people for that price. Palomar is still used for 200-inch. And in 1993, the Keck 1, the 10-meter, Palomar was 5 meters, came online, displacing Palomar as the world's largest telescope. Recommended reading. This is Hale's biography. Very good book. Now, you heard earlier, I'm an engineer. So my favorite quote out of this book is, "I really begin to think the true recipe for making a first-rate astronomer is," this is this astronomer named Captain talking about Hale. "I really begin to think the true recipe for making a first-rate astronomer is to take an engineer and teach him astronomy, not take an astronomer and teach him some engineering." All right, I'm a little biased on that, but I like that comment because I'm an engineer. This book is The Perfect Machine. It's about building the Palomar. This one just came out last year. It's about all the discoveries of Palomar. And this is Mauna Kea, Keck 1 and 2, the telescope that replaced Palomar as the world's largest telescope. And thank you very much. Now, I do have one thing. I managed to pick up a bunch of copies of the book. This is a copy of The Perfect Machine. I'd like to give this away. One catch. You got to promise to read it within a couple months. It's 400 pages. It is very riveting about building and the history of it. Is anybody interested in it?
All right. So thank you guys for coming. Before we get up and wander off, we are going to have a question and answer session. And before we do that, I have been monitoring our live stream chat through my lovely handheld mobile device because convenience. Just a reminder for anyone who has come in during the middle of the talk and maybe missed our opening informational. If you do need the bathroom, it is to my right, your left, that porta potty there. We do have a small gift shop should you want to check that out. All proceeds from that do go to keeping our lights on. It is kind of cloudy. Do we have words? Do we have an observatory open, Paul?
We have 2 observatories that are open, plus Chris is open for NWJAA, I believe. So we have 3 different places to look.
All right, so we do have actually 3 observatories, which are the sheds over to my left. Each houses its own telescope. 2 are going to be telescopes. 1 is open, where we have a camera attached instead of an eyepiece, and we project the image that you would see through the telescope onto a screen.
We have at least 1 observer with his own telescope who said he'd be willing to show people. So.
Yep. And apparently we also have a telescope somewhere on the field. I can't see it because I am short, and I have a large parking area and a bush in between me and that. So you can go explore that. Keep in mind, any scope that does, we are allowing personal telescopes and member clubs to use their own gear for where you can look through the eyepiece. We do suggest that it is only vaccinated people look through the eyepiece, just for safety concerns, because we cannot really sanitize the equipment very well without destroying the optics, because most of the things that will kill disease unfortunately also happen to kill optics and the coatings involved. So we do urge you to be cautious and be mindful that if you are feeling sick or whatnot, please refrain from actually looking through the eyepiece. We do have the option of seeing things through a telescope on the projector screen, like I said. So with that, like I said, we do have a couple questions online, and so I will be doing an question and answer session. When I ask you a question, I'm going to go out there with the microphone so that our online chat can also hear your question, because chances are it is something they would also like to know. So to start us off, one of our viewers online actually had a question right at the opening. They're like, wait, he built an observatory? Like, where do you even start to get that idea? Do you start with the plans? Do you start with the telescope?
I found some ideas online and I designed it myself. As I said, I'm an engineer, so figuring out how to do it was not that hard. My website is skychariot.com/dome, and there's all kinds of construction pictures there. And I'm pretty easy to find on the internet. So there's a lot of pictures, and I just came up with an idea and says, all right, let me figure this out.
Right. So do we have a question from our live audience here? Anyone? Oh, there's one over here. And like I said, let me just bring the mic over to you. Oh, you had a...
So, how do you make sure the dome is the correct size of the telescope?
She asked how you make sure that the dome fits the telescope that you're putting.
It's called measurements ahead of time. You measure it, you know it, you have to know the size, you have to know the rotation of everything. It's all about the engineering and taking measurements and doing calculations. And honestly, all the calculations you can do that I did for my dome, I did everything in Excel. It's nothing real complicated or anything. You just got to take measurements, say, okay, how much is it going to turn, and such like that. How big is my telescope? And then just make the dome a little bit bigger.
Because I'm running the sales desk. Oh, hold on. Yep, let me bring the microphone over.
So these city lights around the New York area, right? How do you find the right filters for like the street lights and the city lights that you typically
If you're
have?
doing visual observing, there are some filters that you can use that help with that. I do all photographic, astrophotography. Everything's computer driven, and where I live, I'm far enough away that it really doesn't bother me that bad. I'm out in the country. I live in Pennsylvania, an hour and 15 minutes north of here, 17 miles from where New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania meet. So it's pretty dark. For the East Coast, it's pretty dark up there. And so there are filters available. There are specifically, light pollution filters. I don't use any of them, but they are available, and they're not terribly expensive. But they're really only useful for visual use. For the astronomy, astrophotography, they're not as useful.
Right. So I do have another question from our online chat. And for anyone on the online chat, please do get your questions in because I don't know how long this will go, but I want to try and get to everyone's question. And if you're happening to be watching this on a rebroadcast, still post your questions in the comment section, because then when I see it, because I do occasionally review all the videos, we'll try and get you an answer. So the next question is, when they were molding that big giant mirror for the Palomar scope, I believe, why didn't they mold it closer to the intended shape?
Because at the time it was impossible to do. Today, at Stewart Mirror Lab at the University of Arizona, underneath the football field, most people don't know this, but the football field at Arizona State University, the glass labs, it's called Stewart Observatory, they melt the glass on a rotating table. So take that sizable furnace and spin it. And when you spin the glass, it makes a parabolic shape. So you have to calculate the exact rotation speed. In 1938 or 35, when they poured this, they did not have that technology to do it. There is only one place currently in the world that can do it, and it's the Stewart Mirror Lab at the University of Arizona.
All right. Was there another question from our live audience? Bueller? Oh, hold on. Let me walk out.
For a beginner's telescope, what's a must to have? Like any certain aperture size or?
No. For example, that picture of Andromeda that I took, that was a telescope that was this long, 3 inches in diameter, refractor. Kim, you got another question over here. And a 70-second exposure. So, and it's a fantastic picture. What I recommend for a beginner telescope for visual use is a 6-inch or 8-inch Dobsonian telescope. It's not really suitable for astrophotography, but it's really easy to use, fairly cheap, fairly easy to bring to move. They don't really allow tracking, but for looking at the moon, looking for planets and things, really easy to get started with. So a smaller 6-inch, 8-inch Dobsonian, and I think you can get them for around $300. What I'd recommend to start with.
We do actually have an example of that scope in the little area I have set up there. After we're done with this, I will
after we're done, come up here and I'll show it to you.
Yeah. All right, we have another question here.
When they're sort of like grading the mirrors for 11 years, how do they know like just how the shape will come out? And
okay, in the first place, the answer is that's a black art. But more importantly, it's very intensive testing. I showed one picture where I said this is the testing setup. They take the mirror, they tilt it up, they shine light at it, with another perfectly flat mirror, and they look for what's called diffraction lines, and they say, oh, I need to touch it here. At the very end, when they were doing it, they would see a spot that needed touching, they'd go with their thumb and rub it for 2 seconds, and then let it sit for 24 hours, because that rubbing for 2 seconds with your thumb would add enough heat to distort it, and they let it sit for another 24 hours. So the testing, I consider it a black art, but it is very well defined, and it is fairly difficult to do. But it's something you can learn to do but there's just a lot to it. There's a lot to understanding about how optics work. So they do it with these, taking other mirrors, shining light, looking for diffraction lines, and it can be a very involved process. The last 5 years, I think, of the grinding were just of the figuring and polishing.
All right, one more.
In between the times he got biggest telescope, but did anyone else get the biggest telescope?
No. For 97 years, from 1897 when Yerkes came online until 1992 when Keck came online, the world's largest telescope had been built by Hale. Period. Nobody else. Well, I take that back. In 1900, they built a 48-inch refractor in Paris. However, it was a financial failure and never got used for science. They built it, then they didn't have any funding to run it, and after a couple of years, it just got torn down. So somebody did build one, but it never got used. So I stand corrected. There was one in 1900, but in 1908, he would have topped that one anyway.
All right. I have a question online because a couple people have noticed that occasionally I'm picking up falling stars. They're shooting right off the door. So it used to be a lot more populated over here, but everyone who has donated $20 or more through our sales desk or through our online means such as PayPal, and you can get that through our website, I've been putting stars with the name of the person who's donated, or they've put their name on a star, and I've been trying to post them on our door. And unfortunately, the wind decided that today was the day where we're just going to have a meteor shower, apparently. So, and the same person asked, do I have a star? And he does indeed have a star because he has donated enough to get one on the door. And I think his was actually the first that fell off. So I need to think of a better way to adhere them because apparently the push pins aren't working. Right. So were there any more questions from our audience here? Anyone? I don't even have crickets this time. Last time I at least had crickets.
Thanks, Mark.
All right. Thank you, Mark, for a great presentation. Thank you guys
for a great turnout.
For coming here to our site, and for those who are watching online. Until next time, have a good night.